I'm going to ask you to imagine a rather disconcerting circumstance, but I ask you to trust me as I guide you through it. I will not leave you in a place of insecurity, but the disconcerting circumstance is, imagine what it would be like if whenever it is time to go back home today, perhaps it's when you leave this church, or if there are other things that you have planned, it's time to go back home. What if you did not have that sense of security about knowing where home was? So I want you to just put that on hold for a second about what that would be like and how that would upend everything else in your life, not knowing where home was. And translate that to not knowing anything in this life beyond being able to physically sustain yourself. Not knowing anything about life beyond, I got to get my next meal, and I've got to keep out of the way of a predator. And I simply need to survive until sundown or until sunrise so that I can go through the pattern again. Although we are animals of a sort on this planet, we do not typically resemble many of the other animals for whom this is the regular pattern of living. By and large, most of us have food security, although not all of us. And we don't have any natural predators. Our biggest threat to our own lives of falling short of their natural span is ourselves. And so we may need to stay out of each other's way more than any other thing that will attack us or eat us in order to live out the span of our lives in all of our days. And this wouldn't be a pressing problem, the idea that you didn't know anything about life beyond physical survival, for a large part of your life. For most people, if you solve the shelter problem and you solve the food problem, then you are with the luxury of other kinds of pursuits of your time. Do I like my work? Do I not like my work? Am I going to be able to retire? Do I find activities that interest me and that I find enjoyment in? But when the bases are the main essentials, the foundations of life are covered, for most people this would not be a problem. But we as human beings, as beloved in the image of God, have the capacity to reason beyond our biological needs. And so we have this great luxury, beyond the luxury of knowing where home is the next time we want to go there, knowing where our source of food is. We have this great luxury to imagine quality of life. This thing that we talk about that involves ideas of fulfillment and satisfaction, of love and relationship with other people, of all kinds of strivings that we make an occupation of much of our time and attention. And in the gospel passages that we have been hearing for the last couple of weeks, starting with the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000 plus more, last week with Jesus addressing the crowd who had come after him seeking more of his provision, and now this week with his declaring that he is the bread of life and that he will give life to the world and that life will be his flesh. Jesus is taking them beyond a preoccupation with their next meal, with their physical sustenance. And I played with that idea a little bit last week with the cliche, another day, another dollar. And we, many times, many of us are able to move beyond that idea of just getting through the day. But it is because we have the opportunity to be enlivened by the one who has given us life and who has given us the gift of unconditional love, so that we may transcend that concern about where's my shelter and where's my food coming from? Jesus is laboring very directly in this section of John's Gospel, throughout this 6th chapter of John, to teach those who he is with about his identity. And there is this interrelated, inseparable link between miracle and word. Word, which is the teaching of who he is and why God sent him into the world. And you really can't have one without the other. If he comes and does miracles, as we played around with last week, he would simply be somebody who was an amazing spectacle creator, somebody who people came to go see the show. And yet, if it was only teaching without some demonstrable acts of God's authority working through him, flowing through him, then he would be liable to the critics who suggested that he was just all talk. And so there's this both and, where he provides sustenance in a way that is beyond common understanding. And then he follows that with a declaration that his very being is sustenance beyond what they need to maintain their bodies. And for those who came to see and who came to accept, who let that teaching and that revelation of his identity seep down into their very being, they made a tremendous leap. It is the leap that even goes beyond those who are able to solve the shelter problem and solve the food problem and get on to occupations of other things that are higher up in the needs pyramid. So understanding Jesus and who he is in our lives is in a way like solving the shelter problem. You have already solved it. The scenario that I asked you to imagine at the beginning, you don't have to contend with today. You know where you're going to be going. You're not going to need to spend any time or any worry or any energy trying to figure out, where is the roof over my head going to be tonight? Not all are in that situation in our world, even in our own local community. But when you are in that place of that security, then you can cast your attention farther and longer. And Jesus' teaching of his own identity in this gospel is an invitation to do that. But it is an invitation to do that not only farther and longer than the next meal or the next place to lay down our heads, but even farther and longer than the span of our lives. And that is the great gift of coming to understand who Jesus was by the life that he lived, is the opportunity that we have been invited in to connect our lives to his, so that we can transcend our biological needs, our physical strivings, and really open up into the fullness of all that God has in store for us to be loved and to be lovers in this world. A bit of that theme was echoed in the epistle reading that Mary read about resembling Jesus' life by acting in love. And these keep getting reinforced over and over and over again throughout the New Testament. And we are commended as often as we might consider, what am I going to have for my next meal? What's for breakfast today? What am I going to have for dinner today? To be aware of, where is the presence of God in my life today? God, how are you speaking to me this day and inviting me, drawing me forward so that I may come to know the fullness of life that you have created for me? Jesus is going to continue to teach about this identity of his as the provider of bread in the coming couple of weeks. And we will move into a contemplation of how this gets reinforced for us in our celebration of the sacrament of Eucharist, and how we are fed by God on a regular basis, both in word and in sacrament, so that our sustenance, just as it comes from the meals that we eat, our spiritual sustenance can be regularly maintained. Our relationship with God is not a one-off conversion moment in which we unlock the mystery and then we can get on with other things and we don't need to attend to it anymore. It is something that when it gets unlocked becomes, as Jesus says in this section of John's Gospel, food for the life of the world. That is an ongoing provision. It is an uninterrupted promise. And it is our opportunity to raise up our hopes and our striving to the very most substantial, most nutritious, and most sustaining spiritual sustenance that is available to us anywhere we go. Amen.